Welcome back to another episode of Suckcessfull, the podcast.
I'm one of your hosts, Blake, and joining me,
I'm one of your other hosts, Justin.
And this is the podcast all about the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in pursuit of it. Let's not waste any more time and get right to the show.
All right. We are recording for the first time. Are you excited, Justin?
Blake, I'm going to do a virtual high five to you. And since we're next to each other, a high five.
Wait. You gotta go the other way.
All right. Are we good? I can't. All right. We're never going to get this. This is how a true start to a podcast should begin. A little awkward, a little bit out of place, but 100% awesome.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to start a podcast, especially one that is called Suckcessfull. I think it goes along with our theme.
Absolutely. First of all, I love the name that we came up with. I think it's so awesome. Let's tell the people what this show is even about.
Yeah, absolutely. So originally, Justin and I were kind of just goofing around and we were having a conversation and we started getting into all these really interesting topics. And out of the blue, one of us was like, we could have had a podcast, and it was kind of a joke. And then slowly, as we continued talking, we kind of were like, wait a minute, maybe we should have a podcast. We should have a podcast. What would we make our podcast about? And we started talking about the fact that success is often different from the way that it's perceived on the outside. There's different steps that you have to take. It's a lot harder in a lot of ways than people want to give it credit for. And a lot of people think that success happens overnight, when oftentimes it happens over years, months, sweat, tears, blood, all sorts of other energy. And so that's kind of where the idea of the podcast came from.
Beautiful summarization there. All I would add is that sometimes success involves vomit as well. But we've covered all the other ins and outs of the body. That one's a big one. The other part of this, I think, that intrigued me so much about this was that it's about not only just the ascent, it's about the journey, but it's also about having fun along the way. Because a lot of the times we meet people, or we look at executives, or we look at people that we perceive as successful, they kind of suck. And so the whole idea of this show is how to be successful and not suck at it in the simplest, easiest way to break it down. And I couldn't think of another fun person to have as a team member, as a partner, as a companion on this. So thank you, Blake, for doing this with me.
Thank you, Justin. I'm excited. I am excited to have you on here as well, because I think we complement each other very well. You bring your life coach skills and your facts and your corporate know-how to the game. And I bring kind of that metaphysical, spiritual stuff that makes you raise your eyebrow sometimes and laugh at me.
Absolutely. So for those gamers out there that are keeping track, I'm more of the Coke on the team and she's more of the pot. I think is how we do it, right?
I actually don't know that reference.
Like cocaine and pot, like marijuana.
Oh, wait, why is that a gamer thing?
I don't know. I just thought it sounded right to say. I just picture like my brother's a big gamer, and I know that when he's up at like 3 a.m., he's always like, they're pounding monsters. And so I'm like, well, you're a doctor. Why don't you just do Coke? He's like, oh, I can't do Coke. I'm like, well, you shouldn't do Coke, but you could.
Okay, fair enough.
And I think one of the other pieces before we actually introduce ourselves like fully and break this down entirely is that the point of success, at least from in my journey, has been it's never ending, right? Like part of the problem is that we have a vision of success. You'll attain that, and then there's something else, and then there's something else, and it's never ending, and it's never really a fulfilling prophecy because there is something else you're longing for. And part of what we're going to talk about on the show is being comfortable being you, enjoying those moments as yourself, having fun, laughing, try not to be too serious about it, and realizing that success is different to everybody. And your version of success, when you look back, I look back 5 years ago and I go, I would have thought of myself as successful back then, but I didn't. And you'll probably look back and think of all these things you've overcome and all these things you've had to go through and just the human condition as a whole. And you're going to feel successful. So it's about embracing all that, having fun, and understanding that the journey of success is not the destination. It's just that it's the journey, it's the trail, it's the adventure.
I definitely think you have some excellent points in that, because especially in my earlier years of going after, I call myself a multi-hyphenate because I have multiple industries that I'm interested in. I have multiple, specialties. And so with that being said, I overworked myself horrible when I was younger. I had this idea that if I worked harder and I worked myself to death, that somehow I would create more opportunities for myself. And that didn't quite pan out. And what I've realized over the years, to kind of touch on a little bit of what you just said, is that, yes, yes, success evolves, but also your definition of it has to evolve, right? Because we have to change the way that we view success in general as we evolve and as things change in order to not only keep moving forward in what we're trying to accomplish, but also to remain happy in that instance and not get so caught up in making success the final outcome, because there's no final outcome. Once you end up succeeding at something, there's something else and you keep going, and that's what life is. And so redefining that and understanding that it's okay for your idea of success to change as you go along and the way that you view it, and defining it by your own terms and not by somebody else's.
A high five. Absolutely. I think that's fantastic. And I think you summarized it in the back there beautifully. So first of all, we got to give Blake credit for this background here. It's badass. That was all her. I just figured out how to make it work so it looks like we're in the same room, because believe it or not, I'm in Texas right now. She's in Florida. And yet it looks like we are, I don't know, a couple feet apart from each other.
It does, actually. And that was a really cool thing that you figured out. But I have to give you credit for coming up with the awesome name, because I was like, I don't know. The original idea of trying to come up with a podcast about success came from a television pilot I wrote called Making It. There's already a podcast called Making It. Help, Justin. What do we call it?
Successful. And I think this whole journey is going to be amazing. Honestly, I can't wait to see where we go with this. But let's introduce ourselves for a second here. Tell the people who we are and not only why we're doing this, but what we're hoping to get out of this. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
You want to go
first? Oh,
tag.
All right, I'm it. So my name is Blake Hollaway. As I had said before, I'm a multi-hyphenate entrepreneur. I'm also a writer. I have continuously had to remind myself not to overwork myself and figure out how to find balance in all areas of my life. And so part of that is, I guess, taking the mystery out of that, being open and honest about those things, having a mentor, having somebody to kind of throw ideas back and forth with on these different topics, on figuring out that balance, on debunking the myths of success. And I think that it's not even just my generation, because I think everybody has this problem that we put all this pressure on ourselves to succeed. And like you had said before, Justin, about your past, where you were actually very successful when you were younger and you didn't view yourself that way. Definitely, I have struggled with that as well. And so I think part of the reason I want to start this podcast is to also help other people who are on that journey of success, finding that balance, debunking those myths, and figuring out that definition for themselves, because I think it could be very easy to fall into kind of these predetermined notions that society gives us about what success is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to feel. And really, we have to get back into our own personal human experience and realize, wait a minute, I'm also a spiritual being that is going through my life. I need to figure out how to balance everything and find that happiness and redefine success to where it's not just based on my career or how much money I'm making and those types of, I guess, material aspects.
Absolutely. I think it's a great summarization, and what a cool thing to bring to the table. So my name is Justin Prust. I'm going to piggyback on what she said in terms of the multi-hyphenate. I have never used that before, and I'm giggling because everything's a hyphenate these days, and I should have picked up on this, but 100%. I'm a life coach, a business executive coach, just an entrepreneur in general. And I've been in and out of so many different facets of the business world, been executive at a Fortune 25 company. And I mean, up until probably COVID, I was traveling over the world. I was working nonstop, and I started looking back and realizing I had 3 kids and I didn't even know their teachers' names. It was just insane. I would, by 99% of the world's definition, be considered successful. And I basically put a full press stop on it and said, look, I'm going to redo my life, because spending so much time with these ding dongs and everybody was so much fun. I mean, it was one of those things that I had to reflect on it and realize that I was working so hard, but what was I working so hard for? And it was all those things that I was getting during the break. And so I had to realize very quickly that there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started my own company in 2018, but it really changed itself significantly during the pandemic, because even when I created my own, I was doing the same thing that I was for so many years. And then I decided to refocus and decided that family first, health, and then business. And that's made a huge difference to me. One of the fun parts that Blake and I bond over significantly is our entertainment stories, because I started entertainment. I was a literary and director agent, and then eventually became a talent agent later. So don't worry, you'll get to hear tons of great early Hollywood stories in there, but it's also just the journey in terms of of, for me, it was forgetting, I guess. My grandfather said this all the time, but it never sunk in because I've always been, I mean, I had a job since I was 13. Like I was always grinding and always hustling, and that no one ever says on their deathbed that they wish they worked harder. And it sounds funny looking back, but I'm in my 40s now, and not that I'm close to death, but it seems a lot closer than when I was in my 20s. And realizing that I'm glad I did everything that I did, but now I have to approach life in a new way. And if I can help inspire others to do that, if I can just help even flesh out my own feelings in this thing, I think it's going to be worth it.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the multi-hyphenate, because that brings me to a different story, actually, about when I first moved out to California and Los Angeles. I met with a whole bunch of people that I was essentially given a list of, here's all the people we know from a couple different teachers and things that were mentors of mine that I want you to go out and meet when you're out there, because they'll be great contacts. They'll give you good advice. They'll tell you what you need to know before you move out to California. So I went out for about 2 weeks and I sat down and I met with everybody. But one of the worst advice that I've ever received was actually on being a multi-hyphenate. Back then, it was like not acceptable. You had to fit into like a specific box. And I remember this person who, we laugh about it now, but he told me, he goes, yeah, I think you really need to make like 5 different resumes and then submit them accordingly. You shouldn't tell, one, if you're going in for, say, a producing job, you shouldn't tell them that you also are a writer. They were very much wanting everything to be separate.
Segmented, yeah.
Over the years, that really bit me in the ass, because first off, I think we were looking at it the wrong way, of the idea of, wait a minute, maybe all of these skills that we have are actually huge benefits and would be more of something to be selling versus trying to hide. And I think that really was a problem when I first moved out to Cali, because it wasn't until like, I think 2 years later that I was like, oh, F this, I'm putting everything. And that changed everything for me. So it's funny because now it's more acceptable because of people like Issa Rae and, things like that, who are multi-hyphenates. But it took meeting people that kind of re-changed my perspective on that, to say, well, did you ever consider the fact that that's actually a benefit and a bonus? Right. That's a good point.
It's crazy, right?
It really is.
And it's funny now, because if you think about the world, it's gone 180 to that, because now they don't want these people that have just done this single thing their whole life. They want you to be an English major with an engineering background with an arts degree. I mean, they want all this variation, because what people are finally realizing is that variety is actually incredibly useful, because it gives you a new way of approaching things, a new way of looking at life, a new way of envisioning what's possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it's taken a long time to sort of embrace that, I think, too, because it's funny, being somebody who specializes in branding, it's really easy for me to brand other people. But when it comes to branding myself, I have to sit there and really think about it sometimes and go, wait a minute. Okay, how do I say that I'm a writer and I do film, but I'm also a graphic designer. I'm also an editor. I'm also this. I'm also that. I can also do these things. Also, I can do that.
It's weird, right?
It is.
But it's cool. And I think that it's similar to kind of what happened to me when I first started my journey out there, right? So I was living out there. I gave myself 6 months to get in the industry. So I basically graduated, and I was doing stand-up comedy. I was loving it. But I said, look, for me, what's the best way? Because I didn't want to be a waiter. Because most people that are out there are in the food services industry, hospitality. And I was like, look, that's not really me. I did that all through college. I don't want to do that again. So how can I stay connected in this industry, have my nights free, do all this stuff, and be flexible in my hours and still do it? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to become an agent. This is like early 2000s. And for those that don't know, that was like the bane of most people's existence. Like, you were a traitor. If you were, especially a stand-up comic, like if you're a stand-up comic and an agent, I'm sure this is a PG-13 episode, you were an asshole. Like, you couldn't be trusted. Like, you were dirty, whatever. But I didn't care. I was in it for me. I knew I wasn't that way, right? I wasn't trying to make anything up.
Hold on that thought. So wait, why? I've never heard that. Why is that considered like you're an asshole for being both?
Because you're kind of a traitor. Because like the idea back then was that there's two sides of the coin. There's like the business side and there's the artsy side. And if you're an agent, Managers were different, right? Because managers are kind of a little bit softer. They're a little bit more, hey, I'm your friend. Agents were the ones killing the deals and trying to, get the most out of it. And they were kind of sleazy back then. I'm not going to lie. A lot of them were really kind of dirty and obnoxious. And
let's be real. I don't know that that's changed that much. No offense to all of my agent friends out there, but there's some fact in that.
Yeah. And again, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig, right? So, and I figured, if I'm going to be successful in the entertainment industry, what's the best way for me to be successful? Be on that side, like understand what really goes on behind there. And I was literally the only person that I knew that was doing that. And whether it's the right or wrong thing, I don't know. But when I first started, I had to go through, I think, over 300 interviews, and I would make it all the way to the final. I mean, it took me literally an entire 6 months to get a gig there. It was so crazy because basically what happened was this guy named Tom had lost his assistant. It was basically like it was dire straits. And this was during what they call the upfront. So this is when advertisers are buying advertising rights to shows. So for those that don't know, that's like a crazy, like agents really only work about a month out of the year total because there's only I know people are going to go BS on this, but it's true. Like you work every day, but you don't really you sit at your desk, you're cranking, you're making calls all day during upfronts and sweeps and everything else. Like you're just doing all those things during that time. The rest of the time, it's kind of what people envision Hollywood being. You're going to lunch, you're kind of relaxed. You're starting your day at 1, maybe 2, maybe 8 a.m. one day. It's weird. It's all over the map. But the point of the story is lost his assistant and needed someone right away. And so I happened to be the last person on that Friday that he saw. And the girl before me basically was just so dingy that he was so frustrated because he would ask her basic questions and she couldn't even answer them. So I show up and is just flustered. He's angry. And so I tell a joke. I don't remember what I said, but I made him laugh. He was like, oh, what a breath of fresh air. So we ended up talking for a half hour, never talked about the job, never did anything else. Went home. I didn't hear anything. Monday, 10 a.m. rolls around and I get this call. And this is like when cell phones, when you got a call, you had to worry about minutes. So I got a call and they're like, Mr. Prust, where are you? And I'm like, who is this? What do you mean, where am I? I'm in my bed. You're supposed to be here working right now. I got the job. So long.
They didn't tell you? Like, you didn't get a notification or anything?
I got nothing. This is at like probably 9, 10 a.m. on a Monday. And I wasn't really in bed. I don't sleep in. I was probably doing something else. But anyways, I literally jumped in the car, ran down and started my job at like 45 minutes later. And that's how my career began. And basically the point of my story was that everyone had told me exactly what you said. You've got to, if you're going to go out for this, you have to make it really laser focused here. And I did the complete opposite. I created one resume and my sales pitch was, I'm unlike anyone else. I don't act like anyone else. And I'm the hardest worker you'll ever meet. It was kind of the summarization of everything. It eventually paid off for me and the rest is history. But it was a very crazy, most people don't believe. And then I show up at the office and my boss, his name was Mick. I ended up not working for because thought I would be a better fit for him. So basically Mick's assistant went to top. I took over his desk, invites me in. And this is back when it was really cool. You could hit a button and the door fogs up. And he sits me down and he's like, Justin, we're glad to have you here. I know you didn't get to meet me, but I'm going to be your boss. And I'm like, you're my boss? Like, this is so messed up. Like, what is happening here? I feel like I've been hit in the gut like 50 times already today. I don't even know how much I'm getting paid yet. I haven't even signed anything.
Unfortunately, that is very how it is there, though. Like, I remember I was temping at one of the major studios out there and just like doing office assistant type stuff. And they were looking for somebody who was going to stay long term. And so I get called in by the producer, like one of the head producers, the executive producers, and he calls me into the office. And mind you, I had been there for 2 weeks and had no idea what the heck was going on. Nobody knew what my job was supposed to do. Nobody knew how anything worked. They didn't have the password to the computer. So I didn't even have the computer for the first like couple days. It was like a shit show. And so he brings me in and he sits me down and he's like, so you've been here for 2 weeks? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, so you must really know what's going on now then, right? And I was like, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I do. And he goes, all right, well, I want you to do the script coverage and give it back to me by the end of the day. And I was like, okay. And I take it and I leave. And that was pretty much it. Like there was no additional discussion. And then I guess come to find out it's really hard for studios to hire people temp because they have to pay extra money for you being a temp. And there's this whole like additional paperwork. Yeah. And so anyway, long story short, I did not end up staying there and getting the job. And they ended up calling me back like multiple other times when things went south, which was great for me because that was when I first moved out. But it just, I'll never forget. He's just like, oh yeah, you know what's going on, right? You've been here for 2 weeks. I'm just like,
nope.
Nope.
I'm not even sure you know what's going on. Yes.
But it sounds like you actually planned your whole LA experience. I just like threw caution to the wind, threw the things that would fit in my car, had $1,000 in my pocket fresh out of college and drove cross country and was like, well, I'm here now. Hope it works out.
And I think, but I like to think of myself as being that adventurous, like being like, I'm going to go do that. Right. But I grew up in that environment and it was a little different for me. Like it was, I understood more about how it worked than most people did because I happen to see it all the time, right? So I realized how fickle it was. I realized I saw so many of my friends, especially growing up, that were trying to be actors that just, I thought they had everything and never went anywhere with it. So I was like, so what do you do that's different? That was always going through my head. I think that for me, you telling the story about going out there on a whim and just doing this like crazy awesomeness and still finding your way is amazing. I like to think that from my side, it's similar because I was kind of trailblazing in a way no one else was doing what I was doing, right? Like I couldn't relate to anyone else because I'd go to work during the day and I'd do stand up at night and then I'd go out for auditions and it was just weird. And eventually I had to choose which one I was going to do because you can't be an agent and get a booking, which for those that don't know. And then on a side note here, you tossed a term out there. And for people that may not know what coverage is they give you a script and you're basically supposed to summarize it. So that's what coverage is. That's the industry term for going in and marking it up and saying, should we do this? Shouldn't we? What are the key points of this? What are the highlights? Is that fair?
Yes, that's accurate. Thank you for telling them that. I forget these things sometimes because it's just so natural for me to throw those terms out. But it's funny because for people who've actually grown up in LA, I've only actually met a couple of you, which is interesting. It's largely transplants in Los Angeles. But the reason I moved out so last minute was I had broken up with my boyfriend of like many, many years when I was in college. And I was fed up with being in Florida because Florida was never where I wanted to be. And out of nowhere, I had this idea for a script. I wrote a pilot and somehow through having no budget and just having a lot of people who wanted to support me and be a part of the project, it got interest from some big producers and directors out in LA. Which was awesome, except that in hindsight, I would have understood the process of that a little bit better. I didn't have an agent at the time. Television pilots don't just get picked up like that. There's like a whole process. And even though it was somebody who was more independent but had studio backing at the time, I think it probably, if I had known a little bit more back then, I might have actually thought twice. But I think moving out was one of the best things I ever did for myself, although it was probably the stupidest thing I ever did. Mainly because I moved out. When I say I had $1,000 in my pocket, I'm not kidding. Like I moved out, I had $1,000 in my pocket. Like I was like, I'm going to make it no matter what. I'm going to figure it out. And that attitude helped me a lot, but also hindered me sometimes because it came across a little arrogant. And I see that in hindsight. But, when you tell a 20-something-year-old that, they're like, whatever, I got this.
But I want to take that for a second. So first of all, I want to commend you because that's badass. Secondly, I want to say that I think it's easy to downplay that, right? And kind of go in that space where you kind of take it as like an ego-driven thing, right? But I like to think at it from the standpoint of that to me is like the definition of success, like truly, because like you and I have that fire that I'm not going to give up. I am going to keep going. I don't care if the hounds of hell are after me. I am going to get this and make it work. I know it sounds, for those that don't act that way, it sounds very ego-driven and very selfish. In reality, I think it's just going after what you want. Now, when you get to that point and you're still arrogant and whatever, yeah, I was that way. I'm going to 100%, and you'll learn more about this in this podcast. I was 100% that way. I was an absolute dick at many points in my life at that stage. That was wrong. But my pursuit and my passion were not. And I think
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think, to be honest, moving out to California was very uncomfortable for me, not only in the physical aspects of not having money. And for those that have never been to California, it's ridiculous expensive.
Yeah.
But what's ironic about that is I was very blessed in the sense that when I first moved out, my first 2 apartments were actually cheaper in rent than I have ever paid anywhere else, because I found my first one through an alumni. The second one, I was living with a lot of people in a very old house and 50 billion cats, which is a whole different story that we'll get into another day, because there's a lot of funny stories that come out of that too. But I don't know. I just knew that I had to sort of hide behind that confidence a little bit, because going into that level of the entertainment industry is not, I mean, I lived in New York, and I still, people say, oh, you make it in New York, you make it anywhere. No, Los Angeles is way scarier, in the sense that, at least in New York, people will tell you things to your face. In Los Angeles, you're playing a game of chess with everybody. And it's funny because that was the first big, huge advice I was given when I moved out there. And the person that gave me that advice, I'm so grateful to have met him, because now he's a very high tier producer. But he sat me down and he said, listen, you've probably met with a lot of my friends. You've met with a lot of people in the industry. I'm going to tell you something that honestly is probably going to scare you, because this is what you need to hear. And I was like, oh crap. And I was sitting there. And meanwhile, I'm thinking about, okay, you have to buy coffee for people when you sit down, and I don't know what he drinks. And I'm thinking about these 50 billion other things that are kind of not even necessarily relevant to the conversation, because I'm nervous. And this is somebody who was very successful already when I met him. So it was already intimidating. And he said, listen, Los Angeles is a game of chess, and you have to figure out who you are on the board. You need to have the mobility of the queen. You need to have the value of the king without being a pawn. And he's like, so you're going to have to figure out who you are. And he said that it's going to take you 5 years before you realize if you even like LA. It's going to take you 2 before you even start meeting the right people. And in your 3rd year, if you make it that far to your 3rd year, that's when you'll decide if you're going to stay until your 5th year. And then your 5th year is going to be the main thing that's going to decide if you're going to stay or not. He said, or if you leave and decide to come back. He said, that's how long of a game this is. And he was like, you're going to have patience, and you're going to have perseverance. And it's funny because at the time I looked at him and I said, I'm going to do all that in 3. And he laughed and he goes, I'd expect nothing less of you. And it's funny because a lot of people, when I tell that story, they're like, oh, you're arrogant, you're this, you're that. Yeah, I was, but I was also terrified. So I was like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it happen. And I think I pretty much stood by that, to be honest. I didn't make it to exactly where I wanted to be back then, but I still think I was able to accomplish a lot of the things I went out there for, which was cool. But it's funny because actually the show I had talked about I came up with this idea for the podcast initially, making it, that conversation is in the script very loosely. But instead, what I wish I would have said, which was a lot more clever in my writer brain, the main character says, well, I'm going to be the grandmaster. And so for those of you who don't know, the grandmaster is the highest tier of chess that you can be. There's very few of them in the world. And the grandmaster is the one who plays all the pieces, right? And decides the game. And so my outlook on success and on life is to remind myself that I'm in control. And I have to make those decisions to play what pieces, play what pawns, decide when the timing's right, do all those things. And it comes down to really deciding what game you're playing as the game master or the grandmaster.
I think that's beautiful. I think it's awesome. And that's, first of all, it's great advice. And I would just, to piggyback on what you said about LA and New York. So here's the difference for those that really want to know it, right? Because I've always got annoyed by the stance that people, Frank Sinatra obviously made it very famous. You can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. But the truth is, the difference that really separates it is that New York has a bunch of other industries. LA does not. LA is built on entertainment. If entertainment were to leave today, you have real estate. That's it. There's no other industry that's implanted there. When you live in LA, you're either attached to entertainment or you wish you were attached. You go to New York, there's finance, there's real estate, there's banking. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's so much to do in New York, and there's still the arts. Whereas in LA, there's only the arts. So when you go there, everyone else I think there was 10 million people, something like that back then. They're all competing for that position. Everyone is going for it. And so a lot of the time you do get an ego, and it's not the ego in sense that you're selfish. It's more the fact that you are building up these walls to protect yourself because everyone else seems to know what they're doing. And then you get in the industry and you realize I was in the industry for 4 years. I still don't know how it works. And I did contracts. I got on shows. I did everything. I still never understood like any of it. And one of my favorite things ever to talk about a fun like money story here, my third day on the job, Wednesday rolls around and payday comes up on Friday. And there was a pool on the wall of basically how many checks were going to come in for these older shows. There were a few other shows that were like lower rated, but like constantly produced income for people. Okay. So they had these lists up there and I saw the numbers and I was like, there's no way. These shows haven't been on for like almost a decade at this point in time. And their one check was like 500,000, right? There were others for like 600. This is every week. Just keep this in mind. Okay.
Wow.
So it rolls around on Friday and there's a check. I only got to see one. The check he is a director and producer on low credit. He brought in his check alone, $250K.
Wow.
The show had been off for almost a decade. So just to put in perspective, there's this kind of money floating around. And again, I still don't know. I would talk with finance. I still never understood how the money flowed, where it went. Like it's the craziest thing on earth.
Honestly, that is the main reason that I largely got out of producing because I was like, I am not a numbers person. I'm good at the business side in terms of organizing and all that type of stuff and scheduling, but the trying to get executive producers and dealing with all of that right over my head. There are much more talented, much more savvy people in that particular realm.
One of the things, especially to talk about in this first episode, that'll be really fun is what do we envision success and what we don't envision success. I know we both met people that we both idolize and they came across even stronger and better. And we've come across people that we've idolized and you meet them and you go, oh man, I wasted a lot of time on you. Fair?
Yeah, that is fair. Absolutely. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
I'll kick it off this time, just if you don't mind. So here's a fun one that it always makes me laugh so hard because I had admired this person so long and I was so excited to finally meet them. And when it happened, it was the antithesis of everything I ever wanted to have happen.
Don't meet your idols.
Well, there are good ones out there, but yes, I'd say for the most part, just going expecting less, I guess. Set your bar less because it's still worth meeting those people, but it's just don't expect a lot because most of the time we forget they're actors, they're comedian, they're something else. They're not able to be their true selves. So brought my parents. The part of my big moment in success was I got them backstage passes and everything to the Tonight Show. And it was so much fun. And I was a huge, huge fan of Seinfeld. And I was so excited because was on the show that day. Got green room passes, got walked in, and he's sitting there and he looks at me and he goes, "Would you please get out? I'm trying to get ready." And I'm like, okay. I got called back that you were ready for us. He's like, "I don't know who told you that, but that was completely wrong." So anyways, that was part one. The show's over. Afterwards, Jay, who is a genuinely, I dealt with him for many years, just a very genuine human being. Like he shoots it straight. He has great advice and he seems to be someone who really cares about humanity, but like he'll help you with anything you need. But he's like, "Hey, you want to go meet Jay again?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So we walk in and my mom's with us and my mom is like such a huge fan. She's so excited too. And again, turns around and is like, "What are you guys doing here? I'm trying to leave." Until he fake calls. There was no dial tone. I could hear. He didn't even push any buttons. He picks up the phone, pretends like he's talking to his agent. And Jay looks at me and goes, "What you going to do?" And he leaves. Leave. I'm like, it was so devastating because I so admired the character. I thought he was such a funny, flamboyant, crazy, weird character. And I assumed like that he was as far from that as possible. And I ended up seeing him several other times. And he was never cordial to me, is all I'll say. So that was probably my big poof right in the gut.
Yeah, that's the worst when you meet somebody that you were really excited to meet, that you view a certain way, and then they don't meet that expectation.
It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. So what's one of yours?
Well, mine isn't somebody that I necessarily looked up to in terms of like loving their acting or anything like that. This was a big director in Hollywood, and I was working at a company and helping out his assistant, and his assistant had been with him for like 2 or 3 years. I mean, like, went to dinner with his family, drove his very expensive Porsche that nobody was allowed to drive to, get it cleaned, whatever, would pick up his wife from the airport, like all these things, like literally his personal assistant for several years. And he asked them to go do something. They left their desk and asked me to cover the desk. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, yeah, you'll just need to sit here pretty much. Like everything's pretty much taken care of around, 2:00, whatever. I want you to go in there and bring he liked this like certain kind of sparkling water. Bring that in because he'll be in the middle of the meeting. Did. Yeah, of course. And it's some sparkling water that actually, fun fact, it's a sparkling water that's only in California that I was asked to pick up at some point before I knew what it was when I had first moved there. And I had to call my friend and I'm like, I don't know what this is. I can't find it anywhere. And he's like, oh, you have to go to such and such place. It's only at these particular grocery stores and it's only a California sparkling water. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. Got it. But anyhow, so the assistant leaves. I'm sitting at the desk, kind of like twiddling my thumbs because there's not a whole lot to do. And of course, the director walks out. And he walks out and he kind of looks at me and he squints his eyes and he acts like he's going to say something, but then he stops and he's staring at me. And I'm like looking at him expectantly, kind of like waiting for him to say something. And he goes, I need you to move my dinner with my wife an hour later. And I say, okay, I'll do that. As in, like, I'll write it down and tell the assistant when he gets here because I don't know how to do that or how to get into his schedule because it's in the computer. And he keeps looking at me. He's standing there and I'm just like, is there something on my face? Like, what's going on? And he goes, you've changed your hair. And at first I'm thinking, I haven't changed my hair. What? And then it dawns on me that it's not that he's looking at me as me and thinking that I changed my hair. It's that he thinks I'm his assistant, who's a man, by the way. How are you so out of touch that you've had the same assistant who's a man for like 2-3 years who picks up your wife and does these things and you can't even tell the difference between us? I didn't even know how to react. I think I stared at him and it was like, yeah, I did.
See, okay, that story is fantastic, but do you see that story is why people viewed me becoming an agent in that light because of that story? Everyone has a story like that. You see where I'm going?
That's true. I will say there are a lot of agents who are not so nice or who are just straight up all about the pretense of being successful as an agent. But then you come to realize that most of their clients left them like a very long time ago and all these phone calls are on. There's nobody on the other line. Oh yeah, that stuff happens all the time. But it's funny because your agent experience and mine are totally different. Granted, I wasn't at or anything like that or any of the big tier ones. I was in boutique ones, but I fell into it by accident. My friend we've been friends now for, probably like 10 years. He's a famous Swedish model and he fell into agent work when he moved here because once you reach a certain age, it gets kind of hard to continue being a model. So he got bored and he didn't want to travel anymore. So he wanted to get his green card to stay in the States. And part of that is figuring out how to get steady work and proving that you need to be here. So he ended up in agent work. So I was at a party with him and it was just like one of those low key, everyone's hanging out around the fire type parties in the backyard of some fancy house, of course, because it's Los Angeles. And he's talking to me and I'm telling him, I'm out here to do film work, da 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 da. And he goes, well, if you're trying to do film work, you should really learn the other side and learn the contracts and how the agent side of things works. He's like, maybe you would want to intern for like a couple of weeks just to kind of learn that aspect. And I was like, sure, that's probably a good idea. So I go into the agency. I'm there for a day. Everything goes fine. The owner really likes me. And she's like, oh, you're very good at this. And I was like, oh, cool. I don't know. So anyway, the next day I come in like I'm supposed to, and there is screaming. And it's funny because it's it's even funnier because all of them actually have accents, like really strong, different accents from different places.
Okay.
And so you just hear 4 different people yelling at each other in different accents, which very loudly, like you can hear it in the elevator. You get off the elevator, you go through like this, it's kind of like a big office, like sitting area. And then if you go past that, there were the actual like individual offices, and they're screaming in those individual offices. And I guess the commercial agent was ticked off about something, and she was like, well, I quit. And she grabs her stuff and she walks out. And I like walk in as she's walking out, and I just see my friend standing there, and he looks at the owner and the owner looks at him, and then they both look at me, and I'm like looking around like, what I don't know what's happening, right? And my friend goes, yes. That's all he said. Next thing I know, I'm being dragged into the office, and they're sitting me down and saying, listen, we just so happen to need a commercial agent, and you just so happen to understand the other side of things. So you want to solve a problem for us, and we'll solve a problem for you since you need consistent work. And that's what happened.
First of all, that is not an uncommon story. For those that don't know nothing about the industry, that is not an uncommon story. Someone's always quitting, by the way. There's always someone quitting somewhere. There's always tears. There's always yelling, and there's always some sort of flirtatious thing going on. And it's not a hashtag movement. It's not creepy. There's a little bit of that, but I don't want to downplay it. But I mean, it's a very flirtatious industry just as a whole. And so there's high emotions all the time. And I love stories like that, because when I got my promotion, similar to yours, where I'd been there for a month, maybe 6 weeks, something like that, doing my thing. And one day my boss announces that he's getting a divorce. And in order for him to pay for his divorce, because he's a partner, he needs more income, because basically he has to cut checks to her all the time. He's like, this is going to be the most expensive divorce I've ever had. And I'm like, well, how many times have you been married? He's like, this is my 4th.
Wow. That's not uncommon 50. Either.
No, of course. Anyways, so he's like, hey, Justin, I'm going to promote you to be an agent. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I need more people to work my desk. You understand how I work. And now I need you out there helping me create more income. I'm like, what? So again, Friday, no salary expectation, nothing talked about, nothing got nailed down for about a month. So I was starting to make more money, but it was inconsistent. Like every week it would go up a little bit. And then all of a sudden I started getting a much larger check. But it just happened. Like I didn't get a say in it. It was just literally, okay, Justin, on Monday, we're going to start working this. He literally gave me a whole thing. This is actually when they had manila folders. And of course we use computers too, but there were manila folders. And he's like, here, I want you to take these, and you're responsible now for movies and television on the art side of the house in terms of the writers and producers and directors. And I was like, what? He just literally passed out, and I did learn everything on the fly. It was the craziest, weirdest thing. And the funniest, one of my favorite stories about it was when I called my mom, and I called her that Friday. I was like, Mom, I had the weirdest thing happen. Told her the story, and she's like, that didn't happen. Because she couldn't believe that was real. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, I'm an agent now. She's like, okay, whatever. So it took her like months until she came out to visit me. It took her months to actually believe. She was like, oh my God.
That is so funny. And actually, that is very common too. Pretty much any of the stories that I tell about Los Angeles, like I joke that Los Angeles is its own country, because 90% of the things that I tell people, down to like mundane, dumb things, they don't believe it. They're like, oh, that's not how that happened.
No, it's weird. And to tell you one more funny story about like people that you meet in the business. Okay. So this is towards the end of my career, and I was dating this girl, and actually a mutual friend of both you and I went to a taping of, we go to the show, have a great time. We go backstage, we're in the green room, we're hanging out with a few other people. He comes right over and looks at my girlfriend. I've dated her for like 5 months. And he's like, hey, would you like to go to dinner with me? And they left together.
Your girlfriend left to go have dinner with him?
Yes. It was
oh my gosh.
It was the most surreal thing ever. In fact, we should have Eric on just for that one part, because literally we were backstage hanging out, talking. We're just hanging out, having a great time, laughing. And he literally doesn't even say hi to me. He just comes over, introduces himself. And then she's like, oh, sure, I'd love to go to dinner with you. And I'm looking like just stunned. Like, and they literally get up and leave. And obviously we broke up. But I mean, it was just, that's how weird it was.
Wow. You know, I have this joke between me and my friends that people go through what we call the LA cray, and it hits people at different times. And people who are transplants of LA, when they first move to LA, it's like a culture shock. And shocks on so many other levels too, just because of the difference of how everything is in LA. And over time, oftentimes what happens is people start to sort of go a little crazy, and it manifests in different ways in different people. And it's funny because like some of my friends didn't go through it until their 5th or 6th year being there. Other people, it hit them immediately, but it's like you essentially go crazy and go batty for about a month to 2 months. And then if you make it out of the LA cray, then you end up surviving LA, so to speak. But if you don't, you have like a mental breakdown and you go home. And that's essentially what happens. And every single person I've ever met who's been a transplant in LA has gone through the LA cray, and they have designated moments where they can come back and be like, it was this time at this date, the sun was like that. I mean, it gets so specific sometimes with them. It's hilarious. But yeah.
I think so. The way I would answer it is it doesn't matter if you're from there or not, because it's basically the rules go out the window when you get an entertainment, because it's like we started out with a little bit. There's the business side, which is truly like they do not interact with talent at all. Like they are behind the scenes. Those are the people that do the accounting, all the finance. Like that's one side of the business. The other side is all the creative side and the talent side. I think the business side is very much like any other business because they're taking money, they're doing stuff with it. But the other side of it is there's nothing else I've ever done in my life that's like it. It's so foreign. The way you negotiate, the way you talk, the way you do, like everything is different. And so I think that regardless of if you're born there and you grow up in it, or you know someone and that's been part of it, until you do it yourself, it's easy to have a breakdown. I think I had probably 5 in my time there, maybe more, because I mean, you'll get yelled at for things that you didn't even do. You can get fired for anything. One thing that people don't take for granted is as quickly as I got promoted, I got fired the exact same way. Like it happened so quickly. So you're always on this pedestal of, am I going to fall over or not? And so, that anxiousness is always there. So I think that helps create that environment of scarcity and fear. And I think that zebras or other game animals, I think everyone goes through some sort of change, and there's no way that you can go through it and not come out a different person. Whether it's a better version of yourself or worse, you're going to change. I mean, you came out a different person, I'm assuming, right?
Oh, absolutely. But ironically, it's funny when you get thrown into the places that make you the most uncomfortable is often when you end up finding yourself. Actually, LA still feels like home more than anywhere else has ever felt. And I plan on going back eventually. But yeah, it's interesting because I came out a very different kind of person, a lot more confident too, and going about my success completely differently. LA taught me a lot about what not to do.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel the exact same way about LA. We talked about this, I think, yesterday or the day before. Like, I don't consider anywhere home except for LA. I've lived in Houston almost 10 years. I've lived in London a bunch of time. Like, I've lived all over, and nothing feels like home like LA. And I think it's, like in certain societies, you get conscripted into the military at age 18. I think everyone should have to live in LA at one point in their lives. Because I don't want everyone to have to go to the military. I respect everyone in there, but I don't think you should be forced into it. So I think you should all, in order to grow up, and maybe New York's the same way, because New York is a tough city, but I have more love for LA. So I'm going to promote LA here and say that I think everyone should just live there for a year. Just give it a try, because even if you're not in the arts, it's so weird, especially like if you're from the Midwest, right? Going to the coasts, either coast will rock your world, because the people are so different. And I would say of all the coasts, LA people are actually very friendly, even in the industry. If they don't perceive you as a threat, they are crazy nice to you.
Yeah, it's only if you're a threat, really, that flips very quickly.
Exactly. Like if you're at dinner and someone says, "Hey, what do you do?" and you say you're a producer and they're a producer, you're not friendly. But if you are a talent and a producer, boom, you can knock it out of the park.
Yeah, that's very accurate. And funny that you bring that up too, because going back to the idea of the difference between New York and LA, because I've lived both places. New York is interesting because everyone has a sort of preconceived notion of New York. They think that New Yorkers are rude and loud, which they can be loud, and just unfriendly. But actually, they're very direct is more of the correct term. Of all the places that I've been, New York is, if anything were to happen, like 10 people tend to stop and talk to you or ask if you're okay. There's a cop on every corner. It's a very different kind of lifestyle, and you're more likely to have organic conversations. In LA, it's funny because I got a dog because I wanted a dog, but I also got a dog because I thought it would help me meet people in LA because I wanted a hiking buddy. Well, the thing that you don't realize when you do that is that when you go to LA, everyone talks the dog. And I still find myself doing that. Like years later, I'll be like, oh, hi. And I'm literally having a whole conversation with the dog, one-sided. And then I'm like, oh, hi, I'm Blake. And they're like, looking at me weird. But
What happened?
That's an LA thing. Like people have whole conversations with the dog. You don't end up talking to the owner half the time.
No. And so I agree with everything you're saying. I think part of the allure of LA and part of the mystique is that once you live there, you still don't get it.
Yeah.
There's been so many movies and documentaries and everything done on LA. And until you've been there, I mean, I swear, you still don't figure it out. Like you can find the greatest shortcuts. You'll be creative because of traffic and all that kind of stuff, but you'll still wonder, why is Sepulveda so crazy all the time? No one explains these things to you. Like, and that's the other thing. So people that are going to LA, it's not Sepulveda, it's Sepulveda.
Say Sepulveda, huh?
I think every episode we should have a term that people will totally butcherize because there's a million of them. They pronounce things differently. And I will tell you, one of the things that's still hard for me to do whenever I go back, and I've been back for, I think, close to 3 years now, is areas that when I was a kid were really dangerous. Like you never went to Silver Lake. You never went to these areas because they were not nice.
Silver Lake, really?
That's
Silver Lake's now like the hipster place.
That's my point. And so the city keeps evolving in these areas. Like LA, unfortunately, Hollywood is still grubby. Like they try to do Hollywood and Highland and it's still just not, it is what it is. But there's so many areas that even South Central is not nearly as bad as it was when I was growing up. And it's just evolving. And so I'm going to stop. You know, if you want me to be a spokesman for LA, I'm here for you, LA.
Can we get sponsored by LA? Is that a thing?
Our newest sponsor is Welcome to LA.
Los Angeles County.
And Orange.
By the way, Los Angeles County is huge.
Okay. Here's the distinction too. This always makes me giggle. If you're from the East Coast or Midwest, counties you can walk through sometimes. There is no county on the West Coast. Once you get to like Arizona and Nevada, that way, counties can be hundreds of miles. And yes, LA County is very big and would take up probably many other counties anywhere else.
It's so crazy because I can't remember who told me this and how accurate it is, but I want to say he said, if you were to drive from one side of LA County to the other without traffic, it would still take you several hours to get from one side to the other because it's so massive.
Well, here's your fun fact. The two largest counties in the United States are Imperial, and I can't remember the other one. Someone, you can blog below, let us know, but I know Imperial is one of them, and that's where Death Valley is and stuff.
I didn't get to go to Death Valley. That was on my list, but I never made it.
Joshua Tree, I think, is worth it. Death Valley, people are ensconced with it. They think I've never had an awakening there. I've never gone there. And, like Joshua Tree, I do think there is something special there. I've been to Death Valley many times and nothing happened.
Yeah, I never made it there. I did make it to Joshua Tree, though. That's a really cool place. But did you know that if you want to camp there, it's like 2 years in advance that you have to, like their backlog or whatever of scheduling is ridiculous. I thought they were joking. Nope.
That's real?
Yeah, it's like 2 years or something like that. Or at least it was back then. I don't know if it's still like that. But when I lived there, like several years ago, yeah, if you wanted to camp there, you had to book it 2 years in advance because they were already booked for 2 years.
Well, I mean, I know you look at me and you say you're a camper.
Maybe a glamper.
I will hike the shit out of anything. Okay. I will run anything. I hate to camp. I'm just going to come clean
Favorite hiking spot
in LA?
In LA.
I would say two. So one is I love the Topanga Canyon Trail that goes.
That's a good one.
And then I would say actually the one that goes to Mount Baldy, whatever that is, that starts in like Glendale and you go up. It's really cool.
I haven't been to that one.
It's cool because it's like it starts at the base of the mountain and goes all the way up, and it doesn't go all the way to Mount Baldy like you see across from it. One part of it has this like a bridge. I think it's actually called the Bridge to Nowhere, and it literally they built a bridge and never finished it, and so it's I don't know. I'll find we can post it on here, but it's called the Bridge to Nowhere, and it's all part of this beautiful funky trail because it's like in the middle of the desert, but then you get to pine, and it's good. It's really cool. How about you?
That's cool. I do like the Topanga one that you were talking about. Ironically, the one that I've done the most is Runyon Canyon because
Oh,
Thatcher,
great.
my dog, is his favorite one. But there is a harder trail that you can take on that. There's actually 3, but there are at least 3 that I know of. But the hardest one, if you go up through Waddles Park, it's like almost a straight 90-degree angle. And then like it's rolling hills. But when you get to the very top of Runyon, it's a straight 90-degree angle. It's hard, but it's good because if you want to get a workout in, that's the one you should take if you're going to be in the middle of the city because it's less busy. It's easy to find parking because you are parking closer to that park and down a ways instead of like the main entrance of Runyon's always just like a shit show with parking. It's funny, I didn't know until the last time I was there last year. I went hiking and I was like, I can do this. I used to do this almost every day back when I lived here. Haha. And then I like go and I'm like, like you forget the elevation and that coupled with obviously the pollution, but then also just the fact that it's hot as hell and your body's not used to that anymore. Man, I had to stop several times. And then one of the guys that was coming down, he was laughing because he went all the way up and around like twice while I was trying to make my way up. And the people who run like on the edge of on the mountains like that, I just can't even comprehend. I would fall and die.
It's terrifying. No, it's terrifying.
Scary. It's scary, actually. Runyon Canyon, if you're not going on the main trail, is scary if you've never gone actual hiking before because there's just like a 100-foot drop next to you. But for the most part, people are usually fine. But yeah, it kicked my butt, like going up that hard trail. And then when that guy was coming down after his second time and he's laughing at me, he goes, well, it's actually probably good you're taking this particular hike slow because apparently people have heart attacks. And I was like, wait a minute, I lived here for like 4 years and I've never heard, wait, what? And he goes, yeah, this is the hardest trail. If you take it too fast with the elevation because of the way that the elevation and stuff is and the heat, you can have a heart attack. And I was like, what? And I never double checked that that's like accurate, but I know people have been life flighted more often on that trail. So I don't know if that's why, or if it's just because people fell into the 100-foot cliff.
Either way, it's not good. And I think you need to tell everyone after he told you that he fell over dead, correct?
Oh, absolutely. No, he kept running. He, I don't even know. He probably went up and around again. I'm just over here like, even in my best shape, I would not run this trail ever.
Well, I will tell you one of the biggest shocks for me moving to the South is I always took for granted the importance of self, I guess, is basically where I'm going, and like taking care of yourself. And it is not prevalent here because in LA, most people are very conscious about their health. Now, yes, there's the extreme, there's ultra vegans and everything else, but it doesn't matter, right? But there's most of us are pretty normal. All right. That is just not the case here. And that took me a while to get used to because like my daughter last night, we got pizza and she's like, Dad, can we get ranch? I'm like, no, we're not getting ranch. Like, who did you have ranch with? Like, I don't even carry that in the house. And, you know, I'm like, first of all, it's pizza. You shouldn't have to dip here's my advice to everyone out there. If you have to dip your pizza in something, you're not eating good pizza.
I agree with that 100%. And I know that's going to be a very uncommon opinion or whatever. But yes, no, pizza should be pizza, not with ranch and whatever the heck else on there. But to kind of piggyback off of that a little bit, what cracks me up is when I get into conversations with people here about that type of stuff. And I start getting into, yeah, you know, I was eating differently when I was in LA because they don't put citric acid in everything and And they're like, what is citric acid? And citric acid is actually in a lot of foods, largely juices and anything that's really fruit related, because that's what gives it that kind of tart, sweet taste.
Yeah.
It's literal acid. When I was working for a YouTuber, he actually bought citric acid. It comes as a powder. When you eat sour gummy worms and things, that powder, that's citric acid. You can buy it apparently in like bulk. And he bought it because he was doing this how sour can you handle whatever videos. And what he didn't know is it's literal acid. Like he put so much on whatever it was he was eating that he had to get emergency surgery on his teeth because it ate through his teeth. That is what you guys are putting in your body. And so I tell people, I'm like, it drives me nuts because people here don't even know. And I'm just like, it's frustrating because it's so bad for you.
So what you're saying is the next person I think that has meth mouth, that's probably citric acid. Is that what you're saying?
It could be. But it's like, I tell people that when I lived in California, it's just so different. I mean, even just down to the food that's readily available, the restaurants. And what really gets people is when I tell them that, yeah, when you go to McDonald's, they have organic food. And people are like, no, they don't. I'm like, yes, they do.
Well, for those that haven't traveled a lot and been to McDonald's, I mean, that's one crazy thing about McDonald's is that they have basically a set menu for most places, but in Maine, you can get lobster sandwiches, you can get pizza in Canada, yes, McDonald's does have organic stuff there. And yes, for the most part, their menu is different. In fact, I think they even cook some of their stuff completely different just because of the California laws. You can't cook certain ways because of California.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And all of the notifications of all the signs and this is bad for you, that's bad for you.
I will tell you, it is disheartening because that is one thing I actually don't miss. I hated all the warnings everywhere. I do love that you have to post your rating in the window. Okay. That I love your restaurant. Okay. I did hate this California statute, whatever, because what you realize is basically everything will kill you. Okay.
Yeah, you go clothes shopping and there's 50 billion additional tags on your shirt telling you this is going to kill you for this reason. This could kill you for cancer. That. Also, you could possibly have green stuff coming out of your nose. We don't really know why.
And in fact, you do right now. That's how potent this is. So thank God for artists out there. They make the world interesting. And as we go forward with this podcast, you'll get to meet some more. You'll get to hear some more stories. And I think as we kind of wrap up today, I want to say, first of all, thank you. I thought this was a ton of fun. I think we covered a lot of stuff. And I think we set ourselves up for success here.
I think we did too. This is awesome. I'm so excited. And to really dive in deeper to some of these topics is going to be interesting, I think.
Absolutely. And so for those that are intrigued, click below and check the next episode out. We're going to drop one every week. In addition to that, again, I'm Justin, and this is
Lake Hollaway.
Signing off.
Well, Justin, as they say, all good things must come to an end.
Alas, they must. However, this isn't the end because next week, same time, same channel, we drop another episode.
So get excited because we're going to be diving deeper into all the topics of the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in the pursuit of it. So join the conversation below and don't forget to subscribe.